might just say, make an observation that Stuart Brown said. We are made for lifelong play. So if you don't play, you lose the capacity for it and you become rigid and we start dying. So there's a call to arms for you. Playing is how we stay flexible, how we stay young, and just continue to really appreciate and enjoy everything that life gives us. Yay for play.
This week is Play Week, a Sport New Zealand initiative to celebrate play and remind people, that's children and adults, to play.
It is super important for us to play from the youngest age, and you don't have to ask children to play, they'll just do it anyway, because that's how they learn. It's about testing yourself to build up your courage, really. If you're climbing a tree, you're developing your physical skills, but you're also getting really good at working out how far you should push yourself, how far you can go, and managing risk, essentially. So that when you get to be an adult, then you can deal with all of the scary stuff that comes with being an adult with a bit of experience of managing the hard stuff as well as the easy stuff. And the risk of making life too easy for our kids is that they don't feel comfortable doing the hardest stuff.
I'm Gwen McClure, and today on The Detail, how we can make a more playful country for ourselves and our children, where we can play that's not just a playground, and why we need to let kids have a bit more danger. We've just heard from Alex Bonham. She has a PhD in play. We'll come back to her, but first, Jacqueline Collins is Auckland Council's Play Portfolio Lead. I asked her why play is good for us.
I think the most important thing is really, it's fun. You know, it makes us happy. Doing things we enjoy makes us happy, and that's true of all ages. For children, though, I think it goes much deeper than that. Play is fundamental for children's development. Physically, it's absolutely essential. Emotionally and socially, through play, children learn so much about interacting with the world around them and with others. You know, they have to learn to take turns, they have to learn to compromise and cooperate, and that the whole world doesn't revolve around them, which is a hard lesson for little kids, but play is a nice way of teaching them that. And I mean, I'm really unacademic when it comes to play. There are a lot of very academic definitions of play, but I just describe it as stuff we do mostly just for fun. And I think if we think about it like that, it is much easier for us to also expand what play is, because otherwise we just think of play as something that children should do. But actually, if we think of it as stuff we do mostly just for fun, we all do that. You know, as adults, we may call it hobbies or we may call it hanging out with our mates. But actually, if we're doing it mostly just for fun, it pretty much is play.
Jacqueline's job is to make Auckland more playful. So what does that actually mean?
What I'm trying to do is to see how we can make playgrounds the starting place for play, but not the only place for play. So in other words, trying to see how we can make play something that can happen for children in particular, but actually for everybody everywhere in the city. Because it feels like play has become a little siloed into playgrounds, and I'm keen for everywhere to be playful.
I really want to hear more about that. What does a playful city look like?
Well, there are many things. One of the things I talk about is playful spaces and playable spaces. So if you think of something that's playful, it's something that evokes an emotional reaction, usually a happy one. You know, if you see a hopscotch painted on a pavement, it's pretty hard to look at a hopscotch or, you know, a swing in a tree or a tree house and not immediately think a kind of childhood, play, fun. So it gives you a little boost, a little endorphin boost, even if you don't choose to climb up into the tree or have a go on the swing or have a go on the hopscotch, although, you know, a lot of people of all ages do, of course. So those are what I describe as playful things. And I think we can evoke playfulness in our city through all sorts of things, both through adding those kind of things into our environment deliberately, but also just making it clear that we welcome that kind of interaction with our environment. So one of the ways we can do that is with colour, for example, with design. It feels a little bit like most cities these days have become very adult in their sensibilities, and that they're very tasteful and subdued and grey and beige, just like a lot of our houses have ended up being. And while that is all very muted, it's a very adult palette, and it doesn't necessarily evoke a joyful response. But when we all go overseas, if we go overseas and we go to somewhere like Melbourne and see the Laneways art, for example, we all respond to that. We all like colour and art. So what I'm really keen to do is to think about how in our urban spaces we can perhaps bring some of that playfulness. So that's how we add playfulness. Playableness is more about how can you interact playfully with the environment? So if there is that treehouse and you choose to climb up in it, it's become a playable thing. Kids are really good at making everything playable. You can't walk down the street with a young child without them balancing on everything, climbing on every low wall, jumping over things. It makes it a very slow process sometimes to walk places with children. Mm-hmm. But it's about trying to think of how we can deliberately create those opportunities for being playful rather than just them being incidental, which again comes back to perhaps looking at our city through slightly less grown-up eyes, and also responding to the fact that, again, not just children will do that. If we have, to give an example, a park bench that also has a xylophone in it, it's not just going to be kids who are going to engage in that. Everybody will play with that kind of thing. So it really is just being a bit more thoughtful and intentional, and in particular thinking about what makes us happy and what makes us joyful, and it often is colour and design and whimsy and something unexpected. So yeah, all in favour of more of that.
More of that. I mean, it's something that I kind of hadn't thought about a lot for a long time as an adult, and then now I have a kid who's 2, and so now I'm in all these play spaces. I find that you go to the playground and you just sort of sit there and watch your kid go down the slide 8 times. He loves it, but I'd love...
It's boring.
Yeah, it's a bit boring. What can we do about that?
I totally agree with you. And I think this is a really interesting side effect of how play has evolved over the last few generations, I think. I mean, I'm nearly 50. And when I grew up, we used to play everywhere. And going to the playground wasn't such a big feature of our lives. But then gradually there became increased concerns about safety and was it safe for children to roam and were there too many cars and all those things. So playgrounds became more important. But I think you're dead right in that traditionally or typically playgrounds often cater very well to younger children. And I would say maybe up to the age of 7 or 8. But past that age, for a lot of children, there isn't much challenge available in play. And certainly if you're an adult trying to use a play space, there really isn't much to do because good luck fitting most adult-sized bottoms into children's-sized seats or on a swing or down a slide. Nobody really wants to have the fire engine called to rescue them from getting stuck in a piece of play equipment. So one of the things which I'm advocating for with our 21 local boards across the city, who are the ones who actually decide what happens in our parks and reserves, is that perhaps we could start including some play equipment in our playgrounds that is actually built for adult dimensions and does recognise that actually a lot of parents and grandparents and caregivers would like to use those spaces as well when they're there with children. But also during a tahi, our teenagers would quite like to use playgrounds as hangout spaces. They'd probably use them at a different time of day, possibly later in the day when all the kids have gone home for baths and dinner. So I don't think it's something we can build our way out of. I think every playground, it would be great if our big playgrounds could have, some swings or something which are robust and sturdy enough for adults. But I think also, again, it's about normalising the idea of being playful in other places as well. So, if a kid outgrows a playground, maybe that's time for their parents to take them to the local park with awesome trees and do some tree climbing with their children.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things I was thinking about is some cities seem to do it just much better than we do across New Zealand. I was thinking about Amsterdam, where there's a park with a playground and parents can just go and get a drink and then they sit at the park with their drink.
The Vondelpark is the most famous park of Amsterdam. It is a public urban park of 47 hectares or 120 acres.
And I think, that sounds kind of taboo, like you're drinking at the park with your kid, but it's pretty civilized. Like people are just there having a beer or whatever they're having while their kid's playing, and that allows you to hang out with your friend or I don't know, sit and read a book or whatever, and it's kind of pleasant. Do you see anything like that coming up in New Zealand?
This is such an interesting question because we travelled to Europe for 6 weeks in the middle of last year with our children who were 10 at the time. We've got 10-year-old twins or 11-year-old twins now. And that's what we noticed as well. The one thing I would say is there were far fewer playgrounds, but what there was all the bells and whistles, so they would be a fully fenced, they'd be the size of a city block, they'd have a cafe, they'd have a shop, they'd have, toilets, they'd have everything under the sun and also play for multiple ages and stages. So I think it's almost a philosophical discussion that we need to have with our community at some point, because our traditional approach to our play network in Auckland and in most places in New Zealand, to be fair, has been based on a walkable catchment model. So the idea is that you should be able to walk 5 minutes to get to a playground locally. And then if you go a bit further, you'll get to a suburban level playground. And if you go a bit further, you'll get to a destination playground. So the kind of playground you're describing would basically be a destination playground. But we can't have those everywhere. I think the problem lies in the fact that those little local playgrounds were fantastic when children had the freedom to roam without their parents. So if you were 8 and you and your 8-year-old mates were allowed to go down the road and hang out at the playground, you could spend a lot of time having fun on 2 swings and a slide. We know we probably have a situation potentially arising where we need to look at the number of playgrounds. And it's not to say that those spaces shouldn't be still retained for playful use. It's just that maybe if we were to have fewer of those little playgrounds, we might be able to eventually have more of those bigger playgrounds with far more amenity in them. But yeah, we can't afford to have everything, unfortunately, because playgrounds are very expensive assets to build and maintain.
I was in Europe earlier this year, actually, with my 2-year-old, which is, not a great use of your money, but there we were. Some of those playgrounds are amazing. And some of what he had the opportunity to do, he was just shy of 2, and I was kind of freaked out. It was, spaces that I couldn't get into if he got stuck, or, climbing that I didn't feel like he was kind of ready for. But it was amazing how quickly he developed. And that's one of the things I wonder, do we need a bit more danger in our playgrounds here?
Yes, honestly, music to my ears. Our playgrounds are incredibly safe and well designed in New Zealand, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you know that you can take your 2-year-old to a New Zealand playground and it's highly unlikely there's anything there that's going to cause them any injury or damage, which of course is what we want. We don't want children getting hurt. But once they can do everything, you see them looking around and going, oh, okay, well, I can do that again. Okay, I suppose I can do it again. But the problem often with playgrounds, I think, is that you can't adapt their use as you get older. So you can't play floor as lava because playground equipment is usually spaced apart, so you can't fall off one thing and onto another thing. So there are very clear guidelines around playground design, and they serve a really great purpose, I think, for young children to learn the skills to play and to learn the physical literacy, how to balance, how to climb, all those great things. But there will come a time when that will not be interesting anymore. So what I'm trying to advocate for is the creation of more what I'm calling adventurous nature spaces, which is a quite a highfalutin name, but it's basically, can we use things like a fallen tree for play? How do we remove the hazards from that, but keep the risk that's involved in maybe climbing? Because there's been this real understanding within the health and safety community, or some parts of it, and the play sector, that play has become a little bit too safe and that children are not learning to manage risk through play in the way that they should. So, traditionally, or certainly in the past, if you were a kid who was, free-ranging it like I certainly grew up doing, you would test yourself. You would learn to do things. You would see big kids doing things and you would want to have a go. What we're trying to do is encourage a little bit of a return to maybe climbing a bit higher if you're a bit older and you're capable of it. Maybe learning to listen to your instincts and to think, okay, I feel fine where I am now. This is quite exciting. And God, I could go wrong and fall out of the tree, but I think I'm going to be okay. But if I go any higher, it's going to cross that line from exciting to actually quite scary. And I'm probably not going to do that. And that's an important skill for children to learn, to kind of listen to their instincts, think about how they're feeling.
One Auckland school that's adopted exactly that attitude is Swanson. In 2016, then Principal Bruce McLaughlin brushed up against new health and safety regulations with a free play policy.
I want my child to learn that while she's climbing a tree. I don't want her to learn that when she's 15 and some guy who's had 6 beers at a party is offering to drive her home. I want her to already know how to listen to her instincts and trust her own decision-making and stuff. So what's really helpful is that there has been an international safety standard developed last year called ISO 4980. And it is a benefit risk assessment approach for sport and recreation, which includes play. And it specifically refers to the importance of risk being part of play. And it kind of makes the point that play has become a bit too safe in kind of designated playgrounds, but that we have to give kids that opportunity to experience the benefit that comes from testing themselves. And we also have to trust that when you choose to do an activity, if you choose to play rugby, you know that there's a risk you could get tackled and really hurt yourself. But the benefit of participating outweighs the risk. Otherwise, you wouldn't choose to play rugby. But for some reason, we've not been willing to expand that thinking to something like play. What we've been trying to do, I think, in all of New Zealand and actually in all of the developed world to some degree, hence this new safety standard being developed, is we've been trying to remove any risk of injury. And that's probably not realistic. And it has really eroded the experience of playing for kids, which makes it less fun. It's less exciting, less likely to keep doing it when you're older. And also less likely, as I say, to develop that kind of capacity to judge things and make good decisions. But it does also require, I think, parents and caregivers to change their views slightly and maybe remember how much of a risk they used to have in their play when they were growing up.
Let's go back to Alex Bonham, who's written a book called Play in the City, how to create places and spaces to help us thrive.
There's all this stuff about how play has to be voluntary. And actually, I sort of think we should really push our kids to do it, whether they like it or not. As kids, I'm not saying don't make your kids do something that they hate doing, but sort of really, really encourage them, and perhaps even just get them to that sports field, get them to that soccer practice at, from the age of 5, so they at least really give it a try.
So you're talking about play as wider than just a kid at the playground. What other types of play are out there for people? I mean, do video games, does that count as play?
Yeah, it totally is. I think the important thing as kids is that they do a really wide range of stuff. So video games, totally a play. And Jane McGonigal did this interesting research that found that if you were playing with friends, even if it was a shoot 'em up game, it was quite good for you. Good for your sociability. Didn't really have a negative impact. But that was not the case if you were playing hostile games with strangers, because you weren't developing any of the positive teamwork skills or forging relationships with real people. So if you're on a video game with a bunch of your mates from real life, then that's a positive activity, whatever the content of the game. And that's fine. But at the same time, you do need to get out. We need to have lots and lots of different skills. And conversational skills may not be honed in quite the same way doing that as they would be going for a big walk or, like a camping trip or trek. And it would be good for your physical skills to do that.
So what would the ideal playful city look like for you then?
Well, I think I'm incredibly lucky in living in Grey Lynn. It's an area, an old tram neighbourhood. Every 10 minutes you get to a dairy with chocolate in it. There are quiet residential streets with speed bumps or chicanes, which means the traffic doesn't go too fast, so you can let your kids walk or cycle to school there. There's a real diversity of shops. And friendly people in the shops as well. I know that the lady in the dairy in West Lynn has looked after my daughter for years as she's gone there, working her way through the sweets counter. And just building those little local connections is really important. Having a broader range of connections and different ages, that that you belong in an area, and that you're valued by different people, I think is quite important for kids' self-esteem.
What you're saying is it's not just about play spaces being playgrounds or even bike paths or skate parks, that sort of thing, but about community that can support kids to expand themselves and learn safely in those play spaces.
Yeah, but it's all tied together. If you can't walk to the shops, you can't have that connection. If it's a really, really big box store and not a small community, then you're not going to have that connection. So if it's not a nice area to walk around, then you won't bother. So it's connected. But also that grown-up thing, I haven't really talked about how important it is for grown-ups.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How is play important for grown-ups?
Well, it's how we keep on adapting to a changing world by being really interested in new technologies and new things. And it's good to read a novel or be in a play or watch a film that engages with things that are really new or scary and try to sort of mentally plot a way through them. It's good to carry on playing sport or dancing, because not only does it keep you physically fit, it's really fun and you keep connecting with different people, and having something that you're doing together is a really great way to start connecting with a real broad range of people that may not be your best mates, but can be helpful for all sorts of other things. Play makes the medicine go down. It's that bit of sugar that makes you do all of that other really important stuff for community building and knowledge and adaptation, and making it fun and valuable in the now. And I like having a good time. I think everybody does. So I think we should just accept and encourage everyone to do it.
So Play Week is a Sport New Zealand initiative, but what you're saying is it's not just about sport or physical activity. It's just sort of things that make you feel good.
Yeah, it's doing something perhaps that you don't do in your normal day job. So if, say, you work on a building site and you're really physically active, it may be that you want to do some gaming in the weekend with a bunch of mates. It's having that change, never getting stuck in a rut. Okay. That's the important thing.
I want to go back to kids for a second. Well, I guess maybe not just kids, but I guess play in general. Who's doing it best when it comes to play? What countries or what places?
I think traditional countries often do it really well, and often ones with a Catholic tradition. Like, I think New Orleans does it really, really well. And they had a strong church tradition there, but a really, really strong community tradition. The welfare clubs in New Orleans traditionally were about welfare and pleasure. And so they had bands and dances, but they would also look after each other when times were hard. In South America, you've got these amazing carnivals that come out of the Catholic tradition. Bogota and Medellin in Colombia have really led the way in play. Vienna, bit of Catholic Europe, very, very musical, but they've also been incredibly inclusive in the way that they have designed play. Not just about people of different abilities, but they have gender mainstream. They looked at playgrounds to see that they suit girls as well as boys, that people can get there, putting in more ramps next to stairways so that everyone can access it, and a real diverse range of play. So they're fantastic playgrounds, but there's also lots of street art. There's lots of music. Vauban is always really famous. This is in southwest Germany, which is the Catholic bit, again, where there are loads of cycle paths, walking. It's in a number of suburbs. Cars are sort of kept to the edges, and there are big areas where kids can play and get to each other and play in the street and chalk on the street. I think we often don't look towards Asia as playful places. If you go to a park in China and you go there early in the morning, you will see older people dancing in the plazas or playing shuttlecocks. And throughout the day, all these different people move in and enjoy it.
I thought you were going to say somewhere like, in Scandinavia where the kids are out playing in the mud during kindergarten or something. So it's really interesting to hear it's more about a big picture of a, I guess, playful, for lack of a better word, culture.
Well, totally. And Copenhagen and Denmark is fantastic. And I should probably have mentioned it. But the Netherlands also. And there is a strong cultural attitude there to expect young people to be out there and to stop at red lights and to handle themselves well and to not be sooks. It's like on the one hand, they're very firm, but on the other hand, there really is an expectation that kids should have lots of opportunities to play because it makes them more capable. And Dutch cities are fantastically playful, and they do this in different ways. But they also, I think, research suggests they have some of the happiest children with really high levels of well-being. If it became the norm for grown-ups to just assume that kids are allowed out in the world and just keep a bit of an eye out for them, so if something goes wrong, a child could just ask any adult and go, I need a hand, I think we would tackle obesity, mental health issues, agency, sense of belonging, feelings about the future. I think it could be a bit of a game changer.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Alexia Russell and Davina Zimmer. Thank you to Jacqueline Collins and Alex Bonham. I'm Gwen McClure. Ma te wa.